In this video, I'm going to talk about recognizing different slope types without actually trying to measure them. So first, a quick review of the concept of slope. Slope is a number that describes a couple of important things about the characteristics of a line: the steepness of the line and the direction, whether it's going up or down from left to right. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. Now on to the idea of estimating slope. Math problems can often be solved with just knowing the type of slope, estimating the type of slope. Estimating the type could be compared to estimating the speed of a car as you're standing along the side of the road. Without any measurement devices, you can easily estimate whether a car is going too fast or too slow, based on your experience in watching cars on a similar road. It's also pretty easy to detect whether a car is speeding up or slowing down without any measurement devices. We don't need to measure the speed in order to know things. We can use our experience. So this idea of estimating slope is similar. We want to practice recognizing the different types of slope, so we don't need to measure all the time. So let's use this chart to first review some of these categories of slope. We can see that there's a bunch of colored lines on here. The first thing I'd like to talk about is that you should really be focused on the right-hand side of this chart. So I'm going to cover up the left side. So we're really focused on the things on the right. Let's go through some of these slope types. This green line, light green line, is a slope of 0. It's a horizontal line. And now I'm going to start to rotate this line up in this direction. As we rotate slightly up, it's a slight positive slope. This line here that I don't have any arrow on would be a slope of 1, positive 1. I'm going to jump past that point, and now we're into the steep positive territory. We go one more step to vertical, and we have an undefined slope. Now let's take a look in the other direction. This red line is rotated from the 0 slightly downward. That's a slight negative slope. Then this line represents a slope of -1, kind of halfway between these points. This blue line would be a steep negative slope. Now, let me be clear that any line that had an arrow in this region here would be a steep negative slope. And then we could also talk about this purple line, but we've already labeled that up here as undefined. Once it rotates back to that vertical point, it would be an undefined slope. All right. I've tried to develop a gauge that can maybe give you another way of thinking about slope. So let me review this positive slope gauge that I created here. You can see that we have a right angle here, and I have a slope of 0 down here, and an undefined slope up here on the vertical line. In the middle, we have a slope of 1. So as we rotate from 0 halfway up, we get a slope of 1. We continue on, we get an undefined slope. Now let me add some of those other kinds of slopes that we've run into in problems. Slopes of 2 or 3 or 4. Those are the exact steepness of those slopes, and you can see where they're located between 1 and undefined. Down here, we have slopes of 1/4 and 1/3 and 1/2, and I could add other slopes to this region, but these are kind of the common ones that we run into. So this covers all of the positive slopes. Now let's take a look at the negative slopes. Here I have 0 again. I have undefined at the bottom. And in this case, we are going to rotate down from 0 toward undefined. There's our slope of -1, halfway in between. Then I can add my steep negative slopes. -2, -3, -4. You can see that these are rotated from 0 quite a ways toward the undefined. That's why they're so steep. There are the gradual negative slopes, -1/4, -1/3, -1/2. Again, I could add lots of other slopes here. This is a whole continuous process of going from 0 up to a large number as we rotate around. So hopefully that's a little bit helpful in terms of understanding these categories of slope. Now I'm going to go through a few examples of trying to actually apply this gauge. I'm going to jump out of my slideshow now so that I can apply one of these gauges. And we have this light blue line here, and we're trying to estimate what the slope of that is. So I'm going to use a gauge here, but the gauge is just to help you understand how we arrive at the kind of answer. So I'm going to grab this positive slope gauge because this is a positive slope, and I am going to put that left bottom corner right on the line. And see what it shows me is that this must be a slope of about 1/2. I'm not worried that it's exactly 1/2. I'm just interested in whether this is like a fractional positive slope of 1/2, 1/3, 1/4. And this gauge kind of helped me figure that out. Let me put this back and take a look at the negative gauge and show we can't really use that on this line because our blue line isn't going through any of these slopes. So that's why I grabbed the positive slope. Let me go to our next slide. Estimating a slope. Once again, it looks like we should grab this positive slope, and I put this bottom left-hand corner, I'm talking about this corner right here, right on the line, and I can see that this appears to be a slope that's between 1 and 2, but closer to 2, pretty close to 2. But the point of this, being able to estimate this, is that this is a steep positive slope. Not that we know that it's exactly 2 or it's exactly 1.8 or whatever it might be, but that it's more than 1. That's probably the most important thing, is that we recognize that this is a slope of more than a positive 1. Let's take a look at another example. Now, let's try to use that positive gauge again. And we could see that that doesn't really work for us in this case. We need the negative gauge. So I grab that one and I put that upper left-hand corner on the line. And we can see that this slope is between -1 and -2. Now, the idea is that you get sort of used to this to the point where you don't need a gauge. You're not going to have a gauge when you take an exam, but that you're familiar enough with these to recognize that this is a gradual negative slope. The gauge just helps confirm and reinforce what we're seeing. So hopefully using those gauges and going through the categories of slope makes you a little bit more familiar with what different slopes look like. And that's what these practice exercises are going to be all about. They are going to be lines without any grids, without any graph paper, and asking you to identify what slopes those look like. And you're just going to pick the one that must be the closest. All right, time for you to practice those. Good luck.